This is a documentary. This is an interview that took place in 1978, and the question that they are asking him is, "Who are you?" And his reply in this, and he's walking on top of the roof of this and looking at the landscape of an Egyptian Bedouin or sort of adobe village actually. And his reply is that I am an Arab architect who has lost every point of reference in Arab society. And he has lost his Arabity. That is what he says in French, actually, it's a word. And he's searching for an architecture and an urbanism and trying to find that lost Arabite. I mean, so that it's sense of Arabness actually. That is what he's trying to look for. And I mean, his work has been largely described as post-modern Arab architecture actually, but it's very modern also. And uh, one second, let me start presenting. Is this presenting? No. So, what happens is that he went abroad, he came back after learning, and he started teaching in Cairo from 1930 onwards. Then he again went back to Europe. He learned from there actually. Then he came back. I mean, he traveled all over the world, did lots of stuff. But he's always considered this architect of the poor, somebody who was searching for a lost African Egyptian identity actually. And he experienced these consequences like the 1930s when he started teaching in Cairo. It was the heyday of British rule in Egypt actually, and society was becoming very modern. But and he was torn obviously, like we saw in Mexico and in Brazil also, and earlier in India, between the pull of the modern Western traditions and then uh, the he was also drawn to this traditional Bedouin, Arabian or African architecture actually, and he ruled the loss of the rich and multifaceted tradition of African architecture, which had been cut off from its natural roots by money, industry, greed, and arrogance. So Fatih, so throughout his life, he designed lots of buildings, actually, lots of small settlements, villages, which um, he planned based on traditional African knowledge, traditional African settlements, Egyptian settlements. He wanted to go back to his African roots actually most of the time, and that is what his primary interest was in architecture actually, in building this kind of new architecture that we see. Um, and this is one of his most famous projects, this whole village of New Gorna that is designed, and which in spite of the kind of heavy modernity that you saw in the 30s and 40s in northern Africa, um, he still was able to, through his beliefs and through his whatever, I mean, he came from a well-to-do family actually, and he became quite influential by the 40s 50s because of his teaching and writing, uh, and he was able to do stuff like this at that time. But it was, I mean, and it was extremely important what he was doing, because his search was for this different idea of modernity. It is called, I mean, and he always called it an alternative modernity, and he wanted to propose this interpretation of tradition, and that became his way of looking at modernity also. So that, I mean, I think in some sense, this is extremely important um, to look at. Um, Now, again, there is one more thing I want to show you. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why this doesn't work. Does it work? You can see the video now and hear it.
No, I mean, we can't hear it. You can see it.
Okay. Music is important.
Okay, I think we can hear it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is a video shot in a house designed in 1938. The video was made in 2018, but the house was designed in 1938. The architect is Saeed Karim, a visionary Egyptian architect who worked almost at the same time as Hassan Fatih. But his idea of modernity and Fatih's idea of modernity are very contrasting ideas of modernity, actually. And, this, I mean, when people write about him, they call it modernist indignation, actually. And this is Egypt's first contribution to the London Design Biennale. And there are two architects, actually. One second, it's over. Yeah. So this is an excerpt from that video, which was shot in this house designed by Syed Karim, who actually started this magazine called Al Imara. Al Imara means I think it's something to do with the technique of building, actually. And he started this magazine again in 1930, when in 1939 was the first issue, actually. And when Hassan Fatih was already starting to teach and build in Cairo. And they are basically two opposite ways of looking at modernity. Hassan Fatih's alternative modernities and Syed Karim's modernist indignations, both looking at the influx of the Western thought in Cairo, in Egypt, in Africa. I mean, they never. I mean, so Egypt is sort of the source of Africa, right? You can call that, at least Northern Africa. And so Egyptian architecture is also all by the. I mean, and Egypt lies at that zone of Arabia and Africa, actually. So it's in between both worlds. The African world and the Arabian world, actually. And there is this kind of dichotomy in Egyptian identity, which comes to play when you really try to sort of look at it deeply. Um, but yeah, I mean, what is important right now is these two different personalities who are working at this time and have two very different ways of looking at architecture, actually. So this is Al Imara is responsible for bringing this sense of modernity back into in Egypt, in Cairo, through these Western contraptions, devices, um, and technologies, whereas Hassan Fatih is more interested in this alternative modernity, which comes from their own previous roots, actually, from deeper from traditional African roots. And we can see the same kind of conflicts playing out in different countries at the same time. And I think, to me, that is the very that is one of the most interesting phenomena that happens throughout the world, actually, around this time. When these contrasting identity, when this Western modernity, clashes with the traditional or a national cultural identity, and what happens between those two. So same what we saw in India. This Misra is this traditional word for Egypt, actually. And the Misra Concrete Development Company, which is trying uh, to propose or to bring concrete and development back into society in Egypt. And so there is this guy Ahmad Hasim, who is a writer and a thinker. And he talks about this since young poets started to compose in the modern meter. Okay, he's talking about music, and since some novelty fans started to conduct Turkish saz music with a baton, which is how Western music is played. A notorious medrese, okay, I'm not sure what that word means, architecture, which we do not know what to call, is proliferated among our architects. Domes reminiscent of the turban taken off the head of the religious fanatic have started to mushroom under the Turkish sky. So this is Turkey, actually, he's talking about. Hotel, bank, school, ferry landing, all are now a caricature of a mosque. missing a minaret on the outside and a minbar inside. This kind of return to the past is a degeneration. So he's talking about an artificial return to the past, when there is an imitation of the past without meaning. And that kind of and this kind of return to the past, according to him, is a degeneration of architecture. So there are multiple things that are happening here. I mean, I'm not. If you look at the context in which he is talking about, it will be the context where you have false regionalism in some sense, and and people are building, like he's saying, a hotel or a bank with domes and minarets, when domes and minarets held meaning only in terms of tombs and in terms of sacred buildings, actually, in the Muslim world. But when these elements or these kind of um, um, elements, obviously elements become part of other buildings which have no meaning in those buildings, then it's a degeneration of tradition, actually. And but what is interesting is that both Hassan Fathy uses traditional elements, but not in the same way. He is trying to create this alternate modernity, whereas Syed Karim is actually eliminating that traditional sense completely in his architecture. And if you see his works, other works also, they are extremely modern in that time frame. So, if from Egypt again, this is about Morocco, actually, which is again northern Algeria and Morocco, which is close to Egypt, very closely associated to Europe also, because Morocco, Algeria were all under French control at that time, and there is a lot of in that kind of desert regions of Africa, the northern desert regions of Africa, um, because of their close proximity to France. And it's very interesting. France will come up again later when we talk about Japan, but you know, there is a sense of how the French were pushing their ideals of modern architecture to the rest of the world. And this guy Ecohard, he comes to Morocco, Casablanca, actually, and builds this kind of very strange housing project in Casablanca. This 8 meter by 8 meter housing, plots which are given to people with basic sanitation and roads which are prepared. And this was one of the first kind of plotting scheme, very modern plotting scheme, similar to what we have seen in India, in Bombay, also in Peru. There was an competition by the UN, actually, in 70s, in which Charles Correa also participated, where it is called a sites and services scheme, where you have a grid layout, you prepare roads, you make the roads, and you prepare sanitation services which lead which the government provides, and then the houses are built by people themselves, actually. And this is the kind of architecture that is starting to be built, slightly more influenced by the kind of modernist traditions, not similar, I mean, completely in opposition to what Hassan Fathy is talking about at that time. And this is in 1953 again in Casablanca. um, and this is an architect, Sidi Othman, who's building in 40s and 50s, apartments and blocks of building which are a very different idea of modernity than traditional ways of living. And this leads to changing of living styles and living architect and living habits, actually. So this is then, I mean, relating it to the rest of Africa, in Ghana and in Tanzania and other places, there are architects who are working there, who are getting influenced by Western traditions, especially the Art Deco, which is in vogue in Europe also at that time. And I mean, you will see, I think we saw that also briefly in Bombay in the 30s, 40s, Art Deco buildings proliferating along Marine Drive. Same thing is happening in Dar es Salaam. This is actually surprisingly a building called the Goan Club in Dar es Salaam, which is by this architect called Almeida. Um, it's a very interesting building with a very different tropical and a very interesting sense of tropical architecture, actually, you know, and in some ways closely related to what modernisms were being, the kind of styles that were also being established in India by if you look at the American embassy in 1950 built, what's his name? This American architect, I don't remember the name right now, but if you see the American embassy in Delhi, the old American embassy, it's very similar in architecture actually. And so, what is happening is that that Africa is also, and Africans feel that, that this is in Kampala. Again, what they are feeling is that they are being defined by others and not by themselves actually, and because their sense of contemporary architecture is very different. I mean, Africa at this time was literally nothing except huts and villages. Cities didn't exist in Africa before it was partly colonized or before it became modernized by the coming of the Western countries. Actually, unlike, let's say, I mean, Japan, there was you go to all these other places that we are talking about, there was density, there was civilization, there was the I mean, there was civilization also, but there were people there. There were cities and villages that were already growing there, and for them to take part in that modern movement or become modern is very different. And in like we saw in Casablanca, you literally had to start from scratch. And same way in the central and eastern parts of Africa, they literally had to start from scratch. And there is obviously older buildings. This is an influence of Art Deco kind of architecture plus local African traditional imageries, or how do you call it, visual, if I don't know. There is a sense, of being African. The language is similar, but there is also an interpretation of Art Nouveau or Art Deco architecture in building. Again, same, that National Library in Dar es Salaam. This architect was particularly highly influenced. This architect Almeida was very influenced by this sense of tropical architecture. So he was always, so architects developed their own ways of dealing with modernity actually, and different architects would deal with it differently. And through their work, you could see that what is the essence that they like to capture about their place, their time, their culture. From all these different architects are working in some sense there's always this struggle between a Western mode of working and a traditional mode of working. In some like Syed Karim take the Western tradition wholeheartedly and build almost completely like that, whereas some try to redefine it. Hassan Fatih redefined it in his own way. This guy is doing it in his own way. Everyone does something to that. This is the same building actually, and you can see how the screens, how the pilotis, which is again taken from Corbusier, uh, how the railings and the staircases are very modern in how they are being designed. But the ethos, there is a certain sense of being in Africa and not in a cold Western hemisphere country actually. And this is obviously, I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure you know this big. This is Francis Kere, uh, and one of the Aga Khan winning buildings actually. He's one of his first buildings. Francis Kere is a very interesting person. He was the son of one of the village chiefs in Burkina Faso. He went to England to study. I mean, he came from a fairly economically stable background compared to lots of other people. And he's actually literally the first architect in Burkina Faso after he comes back. And then he builds this building very recently. This is in 20, this photograph is 2019, but I think the building was built 4 to 5 years back or slightly more than that actually. And his work is now very popular, very famous. And he is also blending, taking the sense of Western technologies, but it's not high-end technology, that you see for in a building in Germany or in London. It's it's ideas actually, and using that, using local labor, local materials, locally available techniques, and building very innovative architecture actually, which feels as if it places itself in that context rather than coming from an outside context actually. And I mean, yeah, this is one of the most interesting image that I've ever found actually. In how buildings are built, in countries like Africa, in places in India also, where people come together to build actually. And it is almost literally like a project that this is something that actually burned down to the ground and was subsequently reclaimed and rebuilt by the inhabitants themselves. So what is left over is the frame. Everything else burned down, and then people come together and rebuild it. And this sense, of this publicness, or I don't know how to call it. I don't know what the word would be actually, but this sense of participation, this sense of doing it for everybody else or doing it together is a very I don't know. I mean, I don't want to use the third world actually, the word third world, but it's a very, I mean, African, Indian, Mexican, or South American. I mean, I think there's a very different sensibility here compared to the Western modernist sensibility. And to me, that is very interesting and something that we need to understand. And uh, we need to understand, and we need to understand the ethos of this thing. If you don't understand that, then it doesn't. Then you won't get the essence of this building. I mean, this building comes out of that ethos, out of understanding that this is how things work in our in our place and our time. It's our time. That's what they write also on the top of the building actually. So this another guy who talks about Africanness. He's saying our search for our Africanness should evolve out of a basic understanding of who we are. To us, this topic is completely overplayed. We are in a difficult position of being defined by others and not by ourselves. We have been quite lazy intellectually, or have not shared with the world who we are through our contemporary architecture. All the ingredients are around us to develop innovative solutions. There will and should be many strands of this contemporary contextual African architecture because our DNAs are different and so is the context. We should not destroy ourselves in this search, but rather share and innovate. What he is trying to explain is that it's not about destroying ourselves by copying what we get, but through this search we find ourselves, and we share, we innovate, we take, we find something from our past, our traditions, put them together, we share and we innovate. And that is because our DNAs are different and our context is different. So the things that come from a Western modernity cannot apply wholeheartedly or completely directly in these contexts. And then this is Minet da Silva. Okay, this is another, I mean, very interesting uh, character who Uh, she is there in Sri Lanka. I mean, there is a lot. I mean, I'm before Geoffrey Bawa. Okay, this is 1950 already, and she's starting to build uh, in in Sri Lanka. She's one of the first female architects in South Asia, and she these are drawings that that are her for the house that I showed earlier. And here she is in 1947 with Le Corbusier at a Siam is the what is it? Siam is that International Modern Architectural uh, Congress, and she is a part of that. And after that, here she is looking at here she is with uh, Pablo Picasso, Mulk Raj Anand, who started Marg in India. and she's there. She's traveling all over the world. She's becoming a part of the modern movement. She's meeting people like Pablo Picasso and Philip and Le Corbusier, and then she comes to India. Here she is actually seated between Walter Gropius and Dan Van Asteren. Um, uh, Corbusier is on the extreme left. Actually, this is Corbusier, and I think that this is Minute da Silva. She is a Mark delegate actually. So this is when Mark has already started. Okay, and this is also, when I think they are discussing magazine and editorials and stuff like that. So again, I mean, there is a lot that we can talk about Minute da Silva. I don't think we have time to go into each person individually actually, because we still have a lot of stuff to finish today. But I think, she wrote an article. I mean, here it says that in 1953 she wrote an article about the house that she designed in Marg, describing it as an experiment in modern regional architecture in the tropics. And you can see, okay, in Africa in the 30s and 40s already somebody is doing that. She's doing it in Sri Lanka by now, and this is far before anybody like what we know of. How when we talk about critical regionalism, we talk about Frampton and Alexander Sones. Okay, they are the ones. Alexander Sones coined the word critical regionalism, and Kenneth Frampton wrote more about it, and he's known for it actually. But there are people, but she is the one who wrote about it much before. And what is happening is this: that the dominant narrative is always dominant, and these narratives which are there, which are going on in the background, are never heard of. She was offering an alternative to the intellectual straitjacket of international modernism by demonstrating that a building could be modern and of its time while responding to a context and a tradition. And this is the crucial thing, that every building wants to be modern, but it also wants to respond to context and tradition. And if a building does that, and these buildings do that actually. Okay, there's one more, I don't know. Yeah, these are all her buildings later on. And this is the only residential building that she ever built, actually, an apartment building, the Sena Nayak flats. This is an interior of that, and this, again, if you look at it, this is reminiscent of Charles Correa's LIC housing and a lot of other modernist housing in India, with these open corridors and open staircases which permit light and ventilation in these flats. And this is reminiscent of what Baba would go on to do and make this kind of style and space hugely popular actually later on. And yes, she was. I mean, this is just details about her actually. She had strong ties with Corbusier, Jane Drew, and Maxwell Fry, and she went around meeting people in the modern world, through to all the conferences in India, elsewhere, and then she brought all these ideas back to Sri Lanka. This is coming to Japan. We are now going, further east actually. And Japan has this very strange history. I don't know if you know about it actually. Uh, Japan was one of the first non-Western country to modernize. Okay, it was one of the first non-Western country in the modern era to become an imperial power. Also, it invaded China. It invaded Korea. Japan controlled Korea for a lot of years. Uh, then and it controlled lots and huge parts of China also. It was uh, like what England did actually throughout the world. Japan did in Southeast Asia for a much longer period actually before. And there were always these kind of struggles between the Japanese culture, Chinese culture, Korean culture, which are again very interesting phenomena. So in this case, in some sense, Japan is an imperial power also, and also a power which has, in some sense, been subjugated by the West. The what happened in the Second World War. and all that. Okay, so I think Japan is a very interesting case in the overall scenario. Just 1 second. So this is the Imperial Villa Katsura. This is in Kyoto, which was actually the capital of Japan at that time. No, it was not Tokyo, but it was Kyoto, which was far more important. And you can see the sense of this is 17th century before this advent of modernism that we see. And you can see the straight lines, the mat, the tatami mat, which is the basis of their architecture and modular system, the rice paper screens, the wooden architecture, the preciseness and the minuteness of its architecture. It's extremely modern. And it's 17th century. And so this sense of modernity already prevailed in Japan. 1 second, just hold on. I need to. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Too much talking. No one interrupts. So this, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, Nimish, we can.
Okay, okay.
But this, okay.
What?
I think you complain, or else the discussion will digress. I wanted to actually add.
Okay, fine, no problem. No, I'll finish this. I think we are almost towards the end. There's very few things that I want to show, but just give you a brief glimpse. This is during the Meiji Restoration. I mean, Japan went through this very interesting phase. It modernized, it gave control, it became it became an imperial power in Korea and China. Then it lost control, then it became subjugated to some extent by the British and and uh, the Western world for some time. Then that was the Edo Prefecture, actually Edo regime it was called. Then the shogunate came. There was a Meiji Restoration. There were all these very interesting phases in the history of Japan actually, and all of these were very conflicting. But it was one of the first nations to really realize that it has to modernize, that Japan to compete with the Western world had to modernize. And there was no way out of it. And it was one of the first nations to really start building factories and build Western style. I mean, not not uh, Western style bureaucracy actually was one of the first things that they implemented. And because of that, there was this need of large office buildings, large uh, corporate structures and stuff like that, factories and workshops and all of that. And what happened was that there were all in all of these phases that Japan went through uh, before this, and I'm talking about before the Second World War, before Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And that one period changed a lot actually in the idea of Japan. um, but this is before that, when they are going through internal churning actually. And this is something influenced by the West. This is the newspaper building, one of the first large newspaper buildings in this part of the world actually. This is a competition. uh, and I mean, Japan was also one of the first countries to implement a parallel calendar system, where there was a Georgian calendar and a Japanese calendar. So in some sense, it realized that you need to modernize. uh, like, I mean, now if you compare it to Turkey at the same time, Okay, Turkey, there was a ruler Ataturk who came and he said that we do not want to go back to tradition, we want to become modern actually. And there was this whole phase of modernization in Turkey. And it really tried to cut off, like, you know, what is sort of integral to modernity, this sense of tabula rasa in Turkey. What Kemal Ataturk did there, that there it's a clean slate now, you know, like the way we build Chandigarh, or in Brazil they build Brasilia. You find a clean slate. You know how Chandigarh was found, right? Nehru actually rode. Nehru went on a plane looking around the Shivalik Hills, and from an aircraft, from the window of an aircraft, he pointed that this is the land where we will build a new city. It was literally like that. And so there were these sense of kind of tabula rasa modernism, whereas in Japan it was never possible to do that. And what they did was, they wanted to keep both at the same time. So there was this strong sense of culture and tradition in Japanese society, but visually they started becoming modern. They were the first people to adopt the suit and tie culture actually, compared to the rest of the world. They were also the first people to start building very modern buildings actually. So this is a competition in 1931 where one of the entries, this guy Maekawa, who was uh, Corbusier's student actually, who worked with Corbusier in fact, and this is an entry by him. This is again in different parts of Japan, very modern private bungalows. This would not seem out of place in Berlin or in France actually, and it is but it is being built in Japan. And through their graphic arts actually, again, this was the opening in 1927 of the first subway in Japan. So the Japan already gets a subway in by this time. And so they are trying to popularize and to make to bring that awareness of modernism in, of that is already going on in their society. What this guy was talking about African modernism, that they're not able to express that, their sense of modernism, whereas Japan is starting to express its own version of modernism actually. This is a Japanese pavilion entry in the 1937 Paris Expo. This is a power plant. So they are starting to build all these buildings, which India only got to start building all of these buildings after independence, when Nehru started this kind of huge industrial uh, push in the country. Dams and power plants and all of these were being built. Japan already starts doing that much earlier. This is after the Second World War. Actually, this is the World Peace Memorial um, in Hiroshima. And there was this competition actually for this and there were, I don't know, 150 entries in this competition, but no one won in the end actually. And but this thing, what happened was, in this competition. One second, let me find out. Actually, I think I've forgotten a little bit. So this is by Maekawa, who is also the same guy who did this. No, one second, yeah, this one. You also won this competition, and he is a student of Corbusier. And this building is being built right next to the National Museum of Western Art in Tokyo. But surprise, but I mean, I was saying earlier, this is a very interesting anecdote where here most of the artwork was donated by France. So what the French did was, they said that the actual museum will be built by a French architect. And so Corbusier gets this project, and then and no one will, because and then he gets his student Maekawa, who was working in his office in France, to design the building next to it. So you see how things are getting intertwined again, in uh, this push of modernism, but there is a sense of uh, a Japanese-ness in the building that is designed by Maekawa, and which is actually completely missing in the building by Corbusier. And if you see this again, something very interesting happens, that this building 3 years ago he designs in Ahmedabad. This is Corbusier in Ahmedabad. This is Corbusier in Japan. And for Corbusier, his modernity is independent of context. It does not matter that he's building in India or in Japan. For him, a building, it doesn't. I mean, he is designing a particular kind of building in his own style. He's imbibed that, and he will do the same thing here, and he will do the same thing in Japan. Very rarely Corbusier modified his architecture based on the location, based on the place. So, so that is, I mean, so this is what happens in modernity. And what the Japanese architects tried to do was to bridge the gap between the country's traditional buildings and its contemporary architecture, giving Japan its own unique aesthetic character. If you go and see in Japan right now, also older buildings are like that. And the offshoot of this kind of this imposition of very modern Western architecture in Japan is later, as people become more mature and become more aware. I don't know if you guys saw this, but I grew up when I was a child, watching this kind of giant robot, which was a the Japanese cartoon or animated series actually. And Japan was this kind of very interesting country which had this modernity, um, storytelling ability, very Western sense, but very Japanese contextually rooted stories. And this is the manga comes from there. Japanese anime is now very popular, so it has its root in Western sort of comic book theories and comic book writing and comic book making, but the context, the subject is very Japanese. And the same way, the Metabolist under Kenzo Tange, um, you know, emerged from a very inherently or inherently Japanese mindset. And they took Western modes, Western ways of doing things, or Western sort of visually partly Western ideas, but they infused it with so much, I mean, there's no other word but Japanese-ness in their way of thinking that nobody else could have imitated or belonged to this kind of ways of thinking. If you look at the Metabolist at this time, and their proposals for new urban ideas, their biological metaphors, all of that, it emerges from a Japanese-ness actually. These are the buildings that are, by Kenzo Tange and by Kitu Take, by all of these people who are part of the Metabolist movement, um, who who become very popular at a particular time in Japan. And they are starting to then proliferate around the world actually. And Tange is very extremely influential in lots of other Western architects' works also now. Kisho Kurokawa. I mean, this is one of the most famous buildings, the Nagaki, the capsule tower in Tokyo, which takes a very Japanese way of living life. You go very minimal. All you need is a capsule to sleep. You go to work all day. This ethic, the work ethic is in Japan is very strong. I'm sure you all know that. They work extremely hard, and all they need is to go home and sleep. They don't go home for anything else. So the sense of the home is again very precise, very minimal, which we saw in the first photograph also of the Imperial Palace. In spite of that being a palace, the interiors is almost like a very simple domestic building. So that kind of minimalism in Japanese-ness translates to a maximalism in public life. In this kind of giant robotic structures and stuff like that. But what they need in their personal life is very different. So yeah, I mean, then it starts, uh, talking about that sense of Japanese-ness. And so then, I mean, yeah, now we come to the end of this part actually. Um, and what I want to see the thing that I'm trying to show is this idea of cross history actually. You know, what is called history. I mean, crossy, and it's beyond comparison actually. That what happens is this kind of I'll just read out this definition of cross history, that a multidimensional approach that acknowledges the plurality and complex configurations that result from it. Accordingly, entities and objects of research are not merely considered in relation to one another, but also through one another in terms of relationships, interactions, and circulation. How we look at Corbusier in Japan and in India, and Corbusier and Maxwell Fry in Africa, and then coming to India, and then building buildings there, influencing local architects, and those local architects taking that work in future in other places actually. And so that this kind of, so you learn history through this crossing of ideas, and this crossing and mixing of these currents and trends everywhere. There is no one single dominant narrative of history. The way, that's what we say, that this modernity, that I think a long time ago, till a while ago maybe, this idea of modernity was very western rooted, and now we are realizing that there are all these multiple trajectories and alternative realities to this idea of modernity. That's it. Thank you. Okay.
And so does anyone wants to kind of start with the discussion? What at least you realized, I mean, what at least you found today? Because there were quite interesting kind of points, or rather, moments wherein you found good interconnections actually. So what, okay, I think one thing, Namesh, I wanted to kind of comment, because I have not, so you have read Pico here, right? So the whole,
Yeah.
yeah, so the whole idea of Japan that he portrays, wherein, though there is a intensive sense of minimalism, but there is at the same time they have rich cultural tradition, which actually talks about a particular way of life. But
Yes.
when you were thinking about this whole aspect, so one thing I kind of thought that if Hiroshima and Nagasaki wouldn't have been there, then
Yeah.
what would have been the face of Japan? Because in the 17th century, because I was not knowing that villa that you told, which was built on in 17th
Yeah.
century, I was just reading and seeing it. So there are these different articles which also talks about that how it was contrasting the exterior and the interior. The exterior was though so much rooted in the context, but the interior was very minimalistic and towards on the lines of modern. And so that was, quite a point wherein I actually was thinking that if they were so much towards this futuristic concepts of, being minimal, being very focused, and discarding the lot of unnecessary ornamentation and whatever. And as you said that they work very hard and they just work and then the sense of home for them. But then there were so many these contrasting ideas in front of me. It was Pico here explained something else. The the whole trend of these upcoming architecture tells something else. And actually, what was there before Hiroshima and Nagasaki tells something else. So,
Yeah.
what is this whole idea of Japan about? Because that is one intriguing thing,
See,
This-
I think it's very interesting. There's no that's the more that's the important thing to understand. That there is no one dominant narrative. What Pico here is talking about is a very parochial Japanese thing, that when that sense of smell or the sense of color in the environment is very important to Japanese people. And he's talking about a sense, but Pico here surprisingly talks only about rural Japan actually. He does not talk about the major cities of Japan, which are very industrialized. So he does not go to Tokyo at all. He's talking about a small town, in the Kyoto prefecture. I think we used Pico Ayer's readings also last
yeah,
year or before that
last
actually,
year
and
only.
that was in fact the genesis. It was in fact the Pico Ayer's article was the genesis of the studio that that came about. So that is again See, I mean, I think it's always like this, no? Every culture has multiple things happening at the same time. So right now, the thing that we are pointing out in terms of this modernity is not something that is directly related to Pico Ayer's way of looking at Japan.
No, 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 it's not. No, it's not. It's
Yeah.
just about my observation of how contrasting this images of
Yeah.
Japan is in front of me. Because if you see
Uh,
other countries, like even you said that you don't want to use the word third world because it gives us a very specific
yeah,
imagery.
exactly.
But still,
Exactly.
we were talking about these countries. Like for instance, if I say that we are talking about these countries which were colonized, okay,
Colonized. Yes.
and
Yes.
modernization was a basically a process of decolonization. If
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
largely, if I say. Okay, so
Correct.
if we think about these other countries and we think about Japan, who has always been like, it even invaded China. And you
Hmm.
see what's the condition, what's the position of China today. Okay,
Yeah.
so for me, the other countries, they kind of fits into this whole process of decolonization and then modernization was kind of an effect. But for me, Japan stands as a very different, what do you say? A very different. It has a very different
Example.
position only. Yeah,
Yes.
because
Yes.
because
Correct.
the way there has been so dramatic shifts, like you said, in 17th century the villa existed. Then
Hmm.
there was a period wherein the whole
Industrialization happened much earlier.
yeah, industrialization happened earlier, and then this whole aspect of Hiroshima and everything coming in, and almost it I think that made Japan go 20 years back.
It
I think that.
literally collapsed. After the Second World War, for almost 20 years, there was literally an American occupation in Japan. For about 20 years, they didn't have an army, they didn't have defense facilities. Were they became incapable of being proud to be Japanese actually.
Mhm.
The same way, in some sense, similar to what happened in Germany also. That pride in being Japanese was lost. And that led to, I'm just reading another fantastic book by this Korean writer who talks about Korean immigrants in Japan. And it's so interesting to look at it how Japanese people look down upon Koreans.
Mhm. True.
And Koreans who immigrated in Japan still cannot get, and who have been born in Japan and have been in Japan for at least 2 or 3 generations, still get an alien card in Japan. They cannot really literally hold Japanese passports even today. That kind of
Oh.
discrimination exists in Japanese society. So I think all societies are torn. So many different strands are happening at the same time that we in our especially in something like this, so we can encompass only very minute strands, and I think it is only things that relate to us in some sense. Like Corbusier going to Japan and come from Ahmedabad going to Tokyo, going to Japan and building a very similar building there is something that is amazing actually. And yeah,
Yeah,
so
and I think even one of the important points that in this lecture was that we have a very Eurocentric notion of starting of modernism, but
correct.
it kind of existed like if someone asks like
Hmm.
when so even in our courses when we say like modernism we start with this whole idea of modernism, we start with this notion of industrial revolution and this whole Eurocentric kind of an approach from this is where the whole idea of modern started, but actually it's not. So that was one of the point to kind of think upon, because if the question comes that so when actually this whole idea of or this whole idea of modern started like totally in the world, not only at one specific nation but in general, like when it
uh,
started, like, this
when it
was
started,
when it started, when was the first, like it's very difficult to say.
you
It's
can't
there, you can't
pinpoint.
trace it exactly.
I somebody with a different way of looking at it will say it was Galileo, or somebody who first invented the first the telescope to look at the moon.
Hmm.
Somebody will say it's the steam engine. Somebody will say, like, if you read Jared Diamond, he talks about guns, germs, and steel. That it
Yes,
was not physically a particular thing, but it was just geography which
right.
led to the advent of modernization and time in some sense. Or so I don't, or some historically would say it was the Renaissance which actually became the point from which modernism emerged.
But again, at the same time, Renaissance, it's again a very Eurocentric approach. We don't know.
Of course,
Before
we
that,
don't know that.
we know the China Valley River civilization was more advanced than what the Nile was.
So in fact, writing was first invented in China,
Yeah,
printing,
paper. Yeah,
and then Gutenberg made the press, which
yeah.
became more popular in Europe actually, right? So in fact, it came there. In fact, some say there is this guy in the 10th century, Aravena, not Aravena, this uh, Arab philosopher who he was the only person who kept and preserved literally every important philosophical treatise or philosophical books from of Greek culture. If he had not done that and translated that, they would not have Renaissance only.
Okay.
So you can go back to that person also as the one person who literally, because at that time, in the 10th century, which is called the Dark Ages in Europe, they were literally burning down books. Heretic fanatics, the religious fanatics in the crusades, all these kind of Christian sects, religious sects, were burning down things, attacking, and they were as fanatic as other fanatic, religions today. And it was this educated Egyptian or Arab philosopher or a group of philosophers, I'm sure it's not never just one person, who were instrumental in preserving Plato, Socrates, everything that was important from Greek and Roman culture and their history. And if they if they were not preserved and then later on discovered or sent to Europe or translated, and they were all at that time in Latin, and he translated that Latin to other languages. And it was only because of him that we have all those things right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think these the point is impossible to sort of pinpoint. Actually, there's no point, in some sense.
Yeah, like if I think, that what was this whole point where in Greece the modernism kind of started. But we don't know. I
Hmm.
mean, if you go to Athens, you go to these other islands, rather than just romanticizing what they had vernacularly, there is nothing. In Athens only I can find that one Shumi's museum which is there, but then this whole advent of this whole idea of modernity, I don't know how much does it persist, exists there, or does it has its own notion or not? Like from there, it actually the question for Greece starts. Okay, anyway,
Yeah.
students, anyone?
Let them
Yeah,
ask.
we are only talking. Anyone has any comment or anything?
No one?
I had a comment actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I and uh, one of our classmates had worked on Hassan Fatih's New Novelization in second year. We made a small paper,
Okay.
and I mean, we looked at it with a lens of vernacular architecture and how we approach vernacular architecture. But today, we also looked at the lens in which he is having a new approach of modernism, but with the lens of vernacular itself. And I think that's a very
Hmm.
interesting lens. When we look at vernacular, we never see how is it also becoming modern, and having a
Yes.
different approach region-wise to
Correct.
modernism,
Correct.
the local or vernacular of that region. So I think it's like a new introduction of a new lens, a combination of modern and vernacular, and it's very interesting.
Okay. Good. No, I think that is the more. See, when you we talk about vernacular architecture, there is in some sense a looking down on that. I mean, we talk about vernacular architecture, and it's very wrong, in some sense to look down upon it. But vernacular architecture is very interesting, and what Fatih does is not imitate it directly. He does not say that I have to build like a Bedouin. right? Who will build with whatever tools he has. But he is saying that we have to learn from that and we have to reinterpret in today's time and understanding our way of life, the Egyptian way of life at that time, how people lived, what families were, how families were formed, and he designed according to that for a social life which would have been rich. So the flats that were being designed at the same time, they took people away from their tradition. Whereas the buildings that Fatih designed at the time, they brought people back to their tradition, in some sense actually. So I think those were completely different approaches. But they were both very modern in that sense. And yeah, I mean, you can then start judging what would have been better, or what is better, or what is not, and that can come later. We don't see. We are not trying to judge anything. I'm not trying to say that Syed Karim was wrong. He was a very good architect, very strong architect at that time, building modernist building, bringing a certain kind of architecture to to Egypt. At the same time, Fatih had a very different approach, which was much more original, much more rigorous, much more rooted in its tradition. So, I mean, I think it's not the point to judge things in history, but to understand why he was doing it and why he was doing it.
Yeah, but also one important point is that we need to understand that what exactly vernacular means also, because we look at vernacular as, I mean,
Exactly.
again, looking, I'm not sure whether I agree to that as looking down is something that we think, but one more thing is we don't necessarily kind of look at vernacular as only something which was there. I mean, there's a difference between traditional and vernacular. Very important difference.
No,
Normally,
no.
we
What
tend
I meant was when students say vernacular, वो झुपड़ा बनाते हैं ऐसा. That
exactly
means
that's
there is
what
a
I
way
meant.
of
Yeah, yeah, that's
that.
what I was doing.
So not that we look down upon it, but the
Yeah,
idea is कि vernacular बनाया तो झुपड़ा बनाया ना, sloping roof
uh,
बनाया तो vernacular हो गया ऐसा है.
true,
So
true,
there is a
true.
very caricaturish idea of vernacular
Yeah,
actually. That's the right word. There's a very caricaturish idea of
yeah,
vernacular, and that is
exactly.
wrong.
Exactly. So we first of all need to understand when we even is it are we having by saying vernacular, are we even objectifying something or adding a image to something, as he said that there's a very caricaturish image of it. But second thing also, Gorna village, if you know, principally or rather it failed. You know that. I mean,
Yeah,
you must
yeah.
be knowing that it failed, right? Because this whole idea of getting modern and even what were the different values together, because they felt that this dome, the whole structure of dome was associated symbolically with the aspect
It's a
of
mosque.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they felt it very weird to live in a house. So to imagine this whole idea of home and domesticity in this structure where there is dome, where actually God resides for them, was very weird for them. So actually, it was abandoned. So it's why this point. It's not to see why it's failed, but it's a very interesting way of seeing these notions of modern, wherein you are trying to bring out people from these very compartmentalized notion of their way of or symbolic notion of people's way of dealing with or certain things. So when actually you are giving these different examples, you see that how different architects dealt with modern, like even getting information to Minute De Silva. I mean, that's a really amazing example. I mean, how she kind of she revolutionized the whole
Yeah.
architecture in Sri Lanka. So even her way of to deal with this whole idea of modern, Corbusier's way, like whatever I say is correct, dealing with this whole idea of modern, being very dogmatic, while Minette de Silva being very open, traveling the world, getting things, choosing things from there and getting it. And then again, with respect to the context, dealing with it in Sri Lanka, was dealing the way of of the whole idea of modern. So that's something. I mean, that's something very interesting to see that there's no one way of this idea. Every
Yeah.
and of course different aspects these kind of have a lot of influences on it.
Okay, so I think we need to end, but I think next time is a full class of
But
discussion.
yeah,
We need to assign 4 or 6 students. I don't know, Rutika, how you want to do
yeah.
that, but
So
we should not talk. I don't want to talk next time. I want to just
no,
listen.
so okay. What I am going to do is I'm just going to give you an idea. So we had these 4 5 classes. Every class had a theme guide. Okay. So with respect to each theme, we'll create one Miro board, and each theme will have its own frame. I'll divide the whole class with roll number wise with respect to those themes. And in the next class, every group need to present their own discussion on Miro. It can be images, it can be keywords, it can be some timelines, it can be just name of architects, it can be anything, whatever you want. Okay. So that kind of a method I'm thinking of. I mean, that's kind of a,
Yeah.
and that will be like a participatory, like a lot of, you need to, maybe the themes I'll give it like today or tomorrow itself. So you can go and refer the lectures which are already given to you. And through that, you can see what interests you. That only one thread also you can, put on Miro, discuss it, talk about that aspect. So it's not necessary to look at the whole presentation, but maybe you just look at one country for that matter if you want. Someone is looking at just Africa and talk about
Yeah.
the whole aspects, all these different countries that we spoke today. Like for
I mean, I think you can find something else also that you want to discuss through the theme of modernity, and we can talk about that also. That is absolutely fine.
yeah. Like or even the countries which were colonized. Okay, like this was one of the thing today. Rather than calling them third world. So yeah, I mean these 4 5 themes I will kind of give you. We can have a Miro board with flames, and the whole class will be divided in these 4 themes. Okay, so that will be our next class. Yeah, clear? Anyone?
Questions?